The smallest angle under which an object can be seen is upon an average for different sites, the 60th part of a degree, or 1 minute in space, so that when an object is removed from the eye 3,000 times its own diameter, it will only just be distinguishable. Consequently, the greatest distance at which we can behold an object like a shilling of an inch in diameter is 3,000 inches or 250 feet. It may therefore be very easily understood that a line passing over the hull of a ship and continuing parallel to the surface of the water must converge to the vanishing point at the distance of about 3,000 times its own elevation. In other words, if the surface of the hull be 10 feet above the water, it will vanish at 3,000 times 10 feet, or nearly 6 statute miles. But if the masthead be 30 feet above the water, it will be visible for 90,000 feet, or over 17 miles, so that it could be seen upon the horizon for a distance of 11 miles after the hull had entered the vanishing point. Hence the phenomenon of a receding ship's hull being the first to disappear, which has been so universally quoted and relied upon as proving the rotundity of the earth, is fairly and logically a proof of the very contrary. It has been misapplied in consequences of an erroneous view of the law of perspective and the desire to support a theory. That is, it's valueless for such a purpose has already been shown, and that even if there were no question of the earth's form involved, it could not arise from the concavity of the water, is proved by the following experiment. Let an observer stand upon the seashore with the eye at an elevation of about 6 feet above the water, and watch a vessel until it is just hull down. If now a good telescope be applied to the hull, will be distinctly restored to sight, from which it must be concluded that had it disappeared through the influence of perspective, and not from having sunk behind the summit of a convex surface, had it done so, it would follow that telescope, had either carried the line of sight through the mass of water, or over its surface and down the other side. But the power of looking round a corner, or penetrating a dense and extensive medium, has never yet been attributed to such an instrument. If the elevation of the observer be much greater than 6 feet, the distance at which the vanishing point is formed will be so great that the telescope may not have power enough to magnify or enlarge the angle constituting it, when the experiment would appear to fail. But the failure would only be apparent, for a telescope of sufficient power to magnify at the horizon or vanishing point would certainly restore the hull at the greater distance. An illustration or proof of the Earth's rotundity is also supposed to be found in the fact that navigators, by sailing due east or west, return in the opposite direction. Here again, a supposition is involved, visual, that upon a globe only could this occur. But it is easy to prove that it could take place as perfectly upon a circular plane as upon a sphere. Let it first be clearly understood what is really meant by sailing due east and west. Practically, it is sailing at right angles to north and south. This is determined ordinarily by the mariner's compass, but more accurately by the meridian lines which converge to the northern center of the earth. Bearing this in mind, let north in figure 19 represent the northern center. So figure 19 represents the northern center, and the lines NS, the directions north and south. Then let the small arrow, figure 1, represent the vessel on the meridian of Greenwich, with its head W at right angles or due west, and the stern E due east. It is evident that in passing to the position of the arrow, figure 2, which is still due west or square to the meridian, the arc 1-2 must be described, and in sailing still further under the same condition, the arcs 2-3, 3-4, and 4-1 will be successfully passed over until the meridian of Greenwich, figure 1, is arrived at, which was the point of departure. Thus, a mariner, by keeping the head of his vessel due west or at right angles to the north and south, practically circumnavigates a plane surface, or, in other words, he describes a circle upon a plane, at a greater or lesser distance from the center north, and being at all times square to the radii north and south, he is compelled to do so, because the earth is a plane, having a central region towards which the compass and the meridian lines which guide him converge. So far, then, from the fact of a vessel sailing due west, coming home from the east, and vice versa, being a proof of the earth's rotundity, is simply a phenomenon consistent with and dependent upon its being a plane. The subject may be perfectly illustrated by the following simple experiment. Take a round table, fix a pin in the center, to this attach a thread, and extend it to the edge. Call the center north and the circumference the south. Then, at any distance between the center and the circumference, a direction at right angles to the thread will be due east and west, and a small object as a pencil placed across or square to the thread to represent a ship may be carried completely round the table with this right-angled position being altered, or the right-angled position firmly maintained. The vessel must of necessity describe a circle on being moved from right to left or left to right. Referring again to the diagram, figure 19, the vessel may sail from the north towards the south upon the meridian, figure 1, and there turning due west may pass Cape Horn, represented by D, and continues its westerly course until it passes the point C, or the Cape of Good Hope, and again reaches the meridian, figure 1, upon which it may return to the north. Those, then, who hold that the earth is a globe because it can be circumnavigated, have an argument which is logically incomplete and fallacious. This will be seen at once by putting it in the syllogistic form. The globe only can be circumnavigated. The earth has been circumnavigated. Therefore, the earth is a globe. It has been shown that a plane can be circumnavigated, and therefore the first or major proposition is false. And being so, the conclusion is false. This portion of the subject furnishes a striking instance of the necessity of, at all times, proving a proposition by direct and immediate evidence, instead of quoting a natural phenomenon as proof of what has previously been assumed. But a theory will not admit of this method, and therefore the zetetic process, or inquiry before conclusion, entirely eschewing assumptions, is the only course which can lead to simple and unalterable truth. Whoever creates or upholds a theory adopts a monster, which will sooner or later betray and enslave him, or make him ridiculous in the eyes of practical observers. Closely following the subject of circumnavigation, the gain and loss of time discovered on sailing east and west is referred to as another proof of rotundity. But this illustration is equally fallacious with the last, and from the same cause, viz., the assumption that a globe only could produce the effect observed. It will be seen by reference to diagram figure 19 that the effect must take place equally upon a plane as upon a globe. Let the ship WE, upon the meridian figure 1 at 12 at noon, begin to sail towards the position figure 2, which it will reach the next day at 12 or in 24 hours. The same 24 hours will have returned only to figure 1, and will require to move for another hour or more until it reaches the ship at figure 2, making 25 hours instead of 24, in which the sun would have returned to the ship if it had remained at figure 1. In this way the sun is more and more behind the meridian time of the ship as it proceeds day after day upon its westerly course, so that on completing the circumnavigation the ship's time is a day later than the solar time, reckoning to and from the meridian at Greenwich. But the contrary follows if the ship sails from figure 1 towards figure 4, or to the east, because it will meet the sun 1 hour earlier than the 24 hours which would be required for it to pass on to figure 1. Hence, on completing the circle 14321, the time at the ship would be 1 day in advance of the time at Greenwich, or the position figure 1. Captain Sir J.C. Ross at page 132, volume 2, says, November 25th, it's a quote, having by sailing to the eastward gained 12 hours, it became necessary on crossing the 180th degree and entering upon west longitude, in order to have our time correspond with that of England, to have 2 days following the same date, and by this means lose time we had gained, and still were gaining as we sailed to the eastward. End quote. In further illustration of this matter, and to impress the mind of the readers with its importance as an evidence in support of the theory of the Earth's sphericity, several authors have given the following story. 2 brothers, twins, born within a few minutes of each other, and therefore of the same age, on growing to manhood went to sea. They both circumnavigated the earth, but in opposite directions, and when they again met, one was a day older than the other. Whatever the truth there may be in this account, it is here shown that be no more favorable to the idea of rotundity than it is to the opposite fact that the earth is a plane, as both forms will permit of the same effect. Another phenomenon supposed to prove rotundity is found in the fact that Polaris, or the North Polar Star, gradually sinks into the horizon as the mariner approaches the equator, on passing which it becomes invisible. First, it is an ordinary effect of perspective for an object to appear lower and lower as the observer recedes. Let anyone try the experiment of looking at a lighthouse, church spire, monument, gas lamp, or other elevated object from the distance of a few yards, and notice the angle at which it is observed. On going farther away, the angle will diminish and the object appear lower, and until, if the distance be sufficiently great, the line of sight to the object and the apparently ascending surface of the earth upon which it stands will converge to the angle which constitutes the vanishing point at a single yard beyond which it will be visible. This, then, is the necessary result of the everywhere visible law of perspective operating between the eye line and the plane surface upon which the object stands, and has no relation whatever to rotundity. It is not denied that a similar depression of a distant object would take place upon a globe. It is simply contended that it would not occur upon a globe exclusively. But if the earth is a sphere, and the pole star hangs over the northern axis, it would be impossible to see it for a single degree beyond the equator, or 90 degrees from the pole. The line of sight would become a tangent to the sphere, and consequently several thousand miles out of and divergent from the direction of the pole star. Many cases, however, are on record of the North Polar Star being visible far beyond the equator, as far even as the Tropic of Capricorn. In the Times newspaper of May 13, 1862, under the head of, quote, Naval and Military Intelligence, end quote, it is stated that Captain Wilkins distinctly saw the Southern Cross and the Polar Star at midnight in 23 hours 53 minutes degrees of latitude, and longitude 35 hours 46 minutes. This would be utterly impossible if the Earth were a globe, as shown in the figure diagram. 10 feet, or nearly 6 statute miles. But if the masthead be 30 feet above the water, it will be visible for 90,000 feet, or over 17 miles, so that it could be seen upon the horizon for a distance of 11 miles after the hull had entered the vanishing point. Hence the phenomenon of a receding ship's hull being the first to disappear, which has been so universally quoted and relied on. Observers stand upon the seashore with the eye at an elevation of about 6 feet above the water, and watch a vessel until it is just hull down. If now a good telescope be applied to the hull, will be distinctly restored to sight. from which it must be concluded that had it disappeared through the influence of perspective, and not from having sunk behind the summit of a convex surface, had it done so, it would follow that telescope, had either carried the line inches or 250 feet. It may therefore be very easily understood that a line passing over the hull of a ship and continuing parallel to the surface of the water must converge to the vanishing point at the distance of about 3,000 times its own elevation. In other words, if the surface of the hull be 10 feet above the water, it will vanish at 3,000 times. The smallest angle under which an object can be seen is upon an average for different sites, the 60th part of a degree, or 1 minute in space, so that when an object is removed from the eye 3,000 times its own diameter, it will only just be distinguishable. Consequently, the greatest distance at which we can behold an object like a shilling of an inch in diameter is 3,000 upon, as proving the rotundity of the earth is fairly and logically a proof of the very contrary. It has been misapplied in consequences of an erroneous view of the law of perspective and the desire to support a theory. That is, it's valueless for such a purpose has already been shown, and that even if there were no question of the earth's form involved, it could not arise from the concavity of the water, is proved by the following experiment. Let an